Join me on this 16-mile circular kayak on the Dyfi River in northwest Wales on the 19th of May 2025. Watch on to learn about the quaint coastal town of Aberdovey, how I got on with the Hiqmar eFin electric kayak motor that I used on this trip, my views on the Aquatec Ottowa drop stitch inflatable kayak that I used, top tips about kayaking the Dovey River, and the stunning scenery along the Dyfi River which winds across the edge of the Snowdonia National Park. I launched at 11 AM at Ynyslas and paddled across the mouth of the estuary to Aberdovey. I continued along the north side of the river with the incoming tide. After turning round at Dovey Junction viaduct just after high tide, I paddled back downstream with the outgoing tide, landing back at Ynyslas at 4:30 PM. I parked on the car park on the beach at Ynyslas Nature Reserve and wheeled my kayak on the kayak trolley down to the water's edge. I had the usual pre-launch photo with my Aquatec Ottowa kayak. I launched at 11 AM from Ynyslas on the south side of the estuary. It was high tide at Aberdovey at about 12:40 PM at the date of this paddle, and it was a 3.84 metres high tide. Ynyslas is situated on an inlet on the south side of the estuary. While it's tempting to paddle straight upstream this inlet from Ynyslas, this inlet will probably come to a dead end on sandbanks about a mile upstream. This happened to us on a previous paddle on the Dyfi, and we had to carry our kayaks across sandbanks in the middle of the estuary and launch back into the channel that runs up the north side of the estuary. You therefore need to paddle straight across to Aberdovey and then up the north side of the estuary to stay in the main channel. The Dyfi River flows into Cardigan Bay at Aberdovey. When the tide is in, the river is almost a mile wide near its mouth. When the tide is out, as like many estuaries, the channel of the river becomes much narrower as sandbanks emerge either side as the water levels drop. There were yachts milling about near to Aberdovey, so I swung upstream of them to keep out of their way as I headed across the estuary. Aberdovey is situated on the north side of the Dyfi River. Local tradition suggests that the Romans established a track into the area as part of the military occupation of Wales around AD 78. The remains of a Roman fort were found about 7 miles upstream on the north bank of the Dyfi at Pennal. During the Spanish Armada of 1597, a Spanish ship, the Bear of Amsterdam, missed her objective at Milford Haven and ended up in the Dyfi estuary. The Bear of Amsterdam was unable to leave for 10 days because of the wind and could not be boarded as no suitable boats were available and inflatable kayaks had not yet been invented. An attempt to burn her was frustrated by winds, and when she did leave, she ended up being captured by a waiting English fleet off the Cornish coast. Hopefully, I'd have more luck on the Dyfi River than the Spanish did in 1597. Aberdovey's time and tide bell celebrates the Welsh legend of the submerged kingdom of Cantre'r Gwaelod beneath Cardigan Bay, whose bells, it is said, can be heard ringing beneath the surface. This ancient sunken kingdom is said to have occupied a tract of fertile land lying between Ramsey Island and Bardsey Island, in what is now Cardigan Bay. Aberdovey's tide and time bell is located on the wharf's wooden jetty and acts as a time marker being rung by the movement of the sea at high tide each day. In the 1800s, Aberdovey was at its peak as a port. Major exports were slate and oak bark. Shipbuilding was based in 7 shipyards in Pennal, where 45 sailing ships were built between 1840 and 1880. As you can see from the flag blowing in this footage, the wind was picking up from the west as I paddled upstream. While this was assisting me on the upstream leg of this journey, my concern was that if the wind continued to pick up, then I would be battling it all the way back on the downstream leg back to Ynyslas. The lower part of the Dyfi River comprises a large estuary which is quite exposed. The Cambrian Coast Railway line runs alongside much of the Dyfi estuary, and over on the left you can see one of the trains passing me as I paddled upstream. The Dyfi River is tidal all the way up past Ynyslas, which is about 11 miles upstream from Aberdovey. Over in the background on the left you can see a railway bridge where I previously found a potential launch spot where you can park next to the road and access the water. Just upstream from there, also in the background, you can see Smuggler's Cove Boatyard, which may, with their permission, be another potential launch spot. Having launched from Ynyslas, I knew that it was going to be too far for me to paddle right to the end of the tidal range of the Dyfi and back. My plan therefore was to come back on a future date when there was a large spring tide and conditions were favourable, with a view to launching from one of the previously mentioned locations, so that I would be able to paddle right to the end of the tidal range of the river. I'm intrigued as to see how far I could paddle upstream towards Cefn-Caer, and once I've done that trip, I will of course upload a video with my findings. I used a Hiqmar eFin electric kayak motor on this trip. I'd bought mine from Bill Hyam Marine, who were great to deal with. The motor slots into a skeg slot on the hull of your kayak. You tether the battery pack down either on the rear deck of your kayak or in the rear of the cockpit, depending on the type of the kayak that you're using. It's operated using a wristband which connects wirelessly to the motor. The Hiqmar eFin kayak motor has 3 modes which are operated via the remote control wristband. Firstly, drive mode propels you along at about 2.5 miles per hour or 4 kilometers an hour. This is the mode that you'll undoubtedly use the most and keeps you cruising along at a reasonable speed. The battery will last about 4.5 to 5 hours when used in drive mode. The second mode is sports mode, which pushes you along at about 4.5 miles per hour or 7.5 kilometers per hour. The battery will last about 1.5 to 2 hours when used continually in sports mode. The third mode is reverse, which propels you slowly backwards. I don't use reverse mode much, but have used it now and again when I've needed to back out from somewhere. I've been using the kayak motor most of the time since launching from Ynyslas on this paddle, although as you can see I do of course paddle most of the time as well. With hindsight, I wish I'd saved the battery for the return leg downstream, because I didn't really need it on the upstream leg with the incoming tide and the wind already assisting me. Dovey Junction viaduct loomed into view upstream. Built in 1863, the 360-foot long viaduct carries the Cambrian railway line over the Dyfi River. Right on cue, a train pulled out of Dovey Junction railway station and crossed the viaduct. Upstream on the left bank are the remains of a Roman fort at Pennal called Cefn-Caer, which translates roughly as hillside of the fort. Cefn-Caer was a small auxiliary fort built in about 70 AD with traces of a ditch still visible outside of the rectangular bank that encloses the fort. It was just after 1 PM and was nearing high tide, so I turned around and started to head back downstream on the return leg. A herd of cows in the meadow next to the river seemed to be quite excited by my kayak and ran alongside me on the bank. I could already feel the westerly wind blowing upstream against me, but I hoped that my kayak motor would keep me going at a reasonable pace and that the outgoing tide would also start to assist me going downstream. Dovey Junction viaduct slid away behind me as I paddled downstream back towards Aberdovey and Ynyslas. I had by now been using my Hiqmar kayak motor for over 2 hours already, mostly in drive mode but also in sports mode at times. There is no indicator to tell you how much of the battery is remaining. I therefore hoped that the battery would last all the way back to Ynyslas, because I knew that I would be battling the wind all the way back. Dovey Junction train station can be seen on the right bank to the right of the bridge over the river. The Dyfi River forms the natural boundary between Cardigan to the south and Meirionydd to the north. It is also considered by many to be the boundary between North and South Wales. The great estuary of the Dyfi is flanked by the mountains of Snowdonia and the Cambrian Range to the north and east, whilst on its southern banks in Cardigan is the largest extent of lowland bog in Britain, Cors of Ochno, rich in wildlife and steeped in legends. The RSPB reserve at Cantre'r is host to both migrant and resident flocks of ducks, geese and waders all year round. Nearby is the Dyfi Osprey Observatory, where you can watch the nest and the comings and goings of these magnificent seabirds. As I paddled downstream onto the lower part of the estuary, the westerly wind blowing up the estuary made it quite hard to go in and whipped up the water quite a lot. On this trip I used an Aquatec Ottowa drop stitch inflatable kayak. Due to the drop stitch construction, it inflates to up to 12 psi so that the deck and hull are firm and rigid. It's very similar to the sandbank style Optimal, since both kayaks are clamshell shaped and are both stable and easy to get into and out of. I've done reviews of both the sandbank style Optimal kayak and the Aquatec Ottowa kayak on the product reviews playlist of my channel. At about 4 PM and with about 2 miles left to Ynyslas, the battery on the Hiqmar eFin kayak motor ran out of juice and the motor suddenly whirred to a stop. This was about the 10th time that I'd used the kayak motor and only the 2nd time that the battery had run out before the end of the route. This panorama shows the estuary a couple of days later near to low tide. As you can see, much of the estuary is comprised of sandbanks when the tide is out, and as with all estuaries, I'd only advise paddling the Dyfi within 3 hours or so either side of high tide. Even then, you need to try to stay within the main channels of the lower estuary, and I find that using satellite view on Google Maps is useful for this. I'd launched from Ynyslas on the south side of the estuary, but I'd travelled up from Aberdyfi where I was staying. If you're coming from the north side of the estuary, then Aberdovey itself would be a better launch location. I landed back at Ynyslas at 4:30 PM. If you enjoyed the video, then please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing by clicking on the right above. Click on the right below to be taken to the playlist of videos of my trips along other Welsh rivers.